Jim Vance had learned, during 26 years wearing a county badge, that the worst sounds were not always loud ones. Sometimes they were almost nothing at all, the soft, metallic click of a gate latch moving when there was no wind, the faint crunch of gravel beyond a bedroom window, the single dry cough from somewhere in the dark after everyone in the house had gone to sleep. Loud noises gave you information. Quiet ones gave you possibilities, and possibilities were where fear lived. That was why at 11:43 on a Thursday night in late November, Jim was sitting alone in the den of his farmhouse with the television, muted the pellet stove ticking behind him, and 8 small security camera feeds glowing across 2 monitors while rain hammered the roof hard enough to make the whole house seem submerged. The storm had arrived before sunset as a wall of black cloud rolling east over Shelby County, followed by thunder that shook the windows and rain so heavy it turned the driveway into a ribbon of brown water within 20 minutes. By midnight, the temperature was supposed to fall below freezing. The National Weather Service had warned about flash flooding, damaging winds, and possible ice accumulation, but Jim had lived through enough Iowa weather to know that forecasts were often less useful than looking out a window. He had done that twice already. The first time, around 9. He had watched the corn stubble bend beneath the wind until it looked like something alive crawling across the fields. The second time, at 10:30, he had noticed the motion lights along the east side of the house flicker in sequence. He'd gone outside with a flashlight and found nothing. That had not bothered him much. Old wiring did strange things in weather like this. What bothered him now was camera 7. The image had disappeared without warning. One moment he was looking at the eastern equipment shed, its white metal walls streaked with rain, and the next the feed had gone black. Not snowy, not frozen, black. Jim leaned forward. The monitor timestamp continued running. 11:44:17, 11:44:17, 11:44:17, 11:44:17, 11:44:2019. He clicked the camera diagnostics. Signal loss. Power unavailable. He checked the electrical panel through the security software. The circuit feeding the exterior camera network still showed active. He switched to camera 6. The west pasture appeared normally, rain slanting across the infrared image. Camera 5 showed the machine shed. Camera 5 showed the south access road. Camera 3 showed the barn. Camera 2 showed the rear yard. Camera 1 showed the front porch. Camera 8 covered the grain bins and the narrow service road leading toward the county highway. Jim watched each feed for several seconds, then switched back to 7. Still dead. He did not immediately reach for his gun. That was something younger men did in movies. Jim reached for the notebook beside the keyboard. He wrote down the time. He wrote down the camera number. Then he wrote power, line, weather. He'd installed the system himself over 3 summers, not because he believed he was in danger, but because he had always believed that owning 400 acres meant knowing what was happening on 400 acres. After retiring from the Shelby County Sheriff's Office at 55, he had spent a year doing nothing except fixing things he had ignored while working. He rebuilt the porch, replaced the pressure tank, installed new locks, put gravel down the south lane. Then, after a rash of equipment thefts in neighboring counties, he installed the cameras. He understood their limitations. They did not make a property secure. They made ignorance harder. That distinction mattered. He checked camera 8. Still clear. Camera 7 was probably a blown connection. He opened the network map. 7 was the second camera on the eastern exterior circuit. He knew the physical layout without looking at the blueprint. The cable ran from the equipment shed toward the barn, then beneath the north edge of the house, up through the attic and out to the camera mounted under the east eave. The feed had not failed because of weather. The system had surge protection. If the circuit had gone down, several cameras would have disappeared together. Only 7 was gone. Jim stared at the black square, then camera 8 blinked. He sat completely still. The grain bins vanished. The monitor displayed signal lost. He looked at the clock. 11:46:02. 2 cameras. 2 minutes apart. The storm continued beating the house. Jim reached for the radio on the desk and checked the county frequency. Static, mostly. He turned the volume down and listened. Nothing. The landline had been unreliable since the last ice storm. so he picked up his cell phone. One bar. He tried the sheriff's office anyway. The call failed. He tried again. Failed. He looked through the window. There was no light anywhere beyond the house. The barn stood about 100 yards away, its outline occasionally revealed by lightning. Beyond it were 400 acres of fields, drainage ditches, a creek, the old windbreak, the grain bins, the equipment shed, and the county road nearly half a mile away. In daylight, the property felt open. At night, especially during a storm, it became something else. Jim had spent enough time in the dark to know that distance could be a trap. He clicked camera 3. The barn feed was still there. Camera 4. South Access Road. Camera 5. Machine shed. Clear. Camera 6. West pasture. Clear. Camera 1. Porch. Clear. Camera 2. Rear yard. Clear. He watched them all again. Then he noticed something. The rain was blowing from southwest to northeast. On camera 1, the porch light illuminated the rain in a diagonal sheet. Camera 2, facing north, showed rain blowing almost straight across the yard. Camera 3 showed rain bouncing off the barn roof. Nothing unusual. He switched to camera 1 again and enlarged the image. The porch was empty. 2 rocking chairs sat beneath the roof overhang. A flower pot had tipped over. The American flag beside the door was hanging limp because the wind had wrapped it around the pole. The camera itself was mounted 6 feet above the porch floor. It had a clear view of the steps in the driveway. Jim studied the corners. Nothing. He minimized the feed and opened the electrical monitoring panel. There was a tiny spike on the exterior circuit at 11:44, then another at 11:46. Not a surge, a draw. Someone had physically disconnected something while the circuit was energized. He leaned back. The room seemed suddenly colder. Jim looked at the pellet stove. It was burning normally. He looked at the windows, all locked. Then he remembered something he had not thought about in years. When he was a deputy, they used to tell new officers that if an alarm went off in the middle of nowhere, the first question should never be, who broke in? It should be, who already had access? Jim opened the property map on the second monitor. The storm had made the entire western portion of the farm nearly inaccessible. The creek was rising. The south road was mud. The northern field had no vehicle access. Anyone approaching on foot would have to cross hundreds of yards of exposed ground. In weather like this, a person would leave tracks, make noise, trigger motion detection, or at least appear on one of the remaining cameras, unless they were already inside the perimeter. He stood. The old instinct returned without drama. It did not feel like fear. It felt like a door opening somewhere deep inside him. He went to the gun cabinet and unlocked it. His pistol was secured in a holster beside 2 spare magazines. He checked the chamber, inserted the magazine, and left the weapon holstered under his sweatshirt. Then he took a flashlight, a handheld radio, and the keys to the utility room. He did not go outside, not yet. He moved through the house, checking every exterior door without opening it. Front door locked, kitchen door locked, garage door secured, basement access locked, mudroom door locked. He checked the windows. Every latch was down. Then he went upstairs. His bedroom looked out toward the barn. He pulled the curtain aside and saw nothing but rain and darkness. Lightning flashed. For an instant, the entire farm appeared in stark white detail. Barn, silo, trees, fields, fence lines. Then darkness swallowed everything again. He waited. Nothing moved. He returned downstairs and sat at the desk. Camera 7, dead. Camera 8, dead. He brought up the system's maintenance logs. There were no automatic failures, no voltage fluctuation, no network interruption. Both cameras had been manually disconnected. The thought was so obvious that it took him several seconds to accept it. Someone was outside. Someone was moving through his property deliberately. He checked camera 5, still operational. Camera 4, still operational. Camera 6, still operational. Camera 6, still operational. Camera 3, still operational. He changed the view angle on camera 3 to the highest digital zoom. The barn doors were shut. The cattle pens were empty. His tractor was parked beneath the lean-to. Nothing. He switched to camera 5. The machine shed was empty. Camera 4. The south road was empty. Camera 6. The pasture was empty. He stared at the screens until his eyes began to hurt. Then camera 5 flickered. Jim's hand stopped above the mouse. The image stabilized. He rewound the feed 30 seconds. The recording showed the machine shed exactly as before. He rewound another 30 seconds. Nothing. He rewound 2 minutes. At 11:47, the feed showed a brief disturbance in the rain near the far edge of the frame. Not a person. Something dark crossing behind the shed. He enlarged it. The image pixelated. He replayed it. The object moved from left to right. Too slow for an animal. Too controlled for debris. He watched again. The figure never entered the open yard. It stayed close to the building. Jim wrote the time down. 11:47. He checked the other cameras. Camera 4 had recorded nothing. Camera 3 had recorded nothing. Camera 6 had recorded nothing. Whoever it was knew where the cameras were. That realization changed everything. Jim shut off the television. He turned off the den lamp. He left only the monitors illuminated. The house became quiet except for rain, wind, and the occasional crack of thunder. He could hear the pellet stove ticking. He could hear the refrigerator compressor. He could hear his own breathing. Then camera 6 went black. 11:51. Jim did not move. 3 cameras, one by one. 7, 8, 6, all positioned on different sides of the property. The pattern was no longer random. Someone was moving around the perimeter and eliminating surveillance as they went. Jim checked the remaining feeds. Camera 4, Camera 3, Camera 2, Camera 5, Camera 2, Camera 1, 5 active. He opened the map and marked the dead cameras. The sequence created a line. Eastern equipment shed, grain bins, west pasture. Whoever was doing this was not wandering. They were cutting the farm's eyes in a deliberate arc. Jim felt the first real pulse of fear then, not because someone was on his property, because whoever was on his property understood the property almost as well as he did. He moved to the basement stairs. The utility room was beneath the kitchen. The main breaker was there, along with the internet equipment and the camera system's backup battery. If the intruder reached that room, the entire system would go blind. Jim stopped halfway down the stairs. He listened. Nothing, he continued. The basement smelled of concrete, oil, and damp wood. He opened the utility room and checked the electrical panel. Everything normal. The camera system backup battery showed full charge. He looked at the cable bundle. No cuts. No tampering. Then he noticed the basement window. It was locked. But there was mud on the outside sill. Fresh mud. Jim crouched. The mud had been smeared across the glass from the outside. 4 fingers. A hand had touched the window. He stared at it for a long time. The handprint was not large. It was not the print of some enormous man. It looked ordinary. That made it worse. He stood slowly and closed the utility room door. He did not lock it. He wanted to be able to hear if someone entered. He went back upstairs. On the monitor, camera 2 flickered. Then it died. 11:57. Jim stared at the black screen. 5 cameras had become 4. He checked the recording. The rear yard camera had gone offline without showing anyone approaching it. That meant the person had found a blind angle. He enlarged camera 1, front porch, camera 3, barn, camera 4, south road, camera 5, machine shed, 4 cameras. He looked toward the front door. The porch light was still on. The storm had become worse. Water poured off the roof like a solid curtain. Lightning illuminated the porch every few seconds. Jim watched the camera feed. Nothing. He zoomed in on the roofline. Nothing. He switched to the digital infrared mode. The porch became gray and white. Still nothing. Then he noticed the camera housing. There was a small shadow behind it. Jim leaned closer. The shadow was too straight, too dark. It appeared to be attached to the underside of the roof overhang. He adjusted contrast. The image sharpened. His mouth went dry. Someone was there, not standing on the porch, not crouching behind the railing. Above it, the human body was pressed against the roofline where the overhang met the upper siding. One shoulder wedged against the gutter and both legs extended along the narrow section of roof above the porch. The person was wearing dark, waterproof clothing. Their face was turned away from the camera. One hand held a small tool. The other was reaching toward the cable feeding camera 1. Jim watched the hand move. The intruder was not rushing. He was working, carefully, methodically. He had climbed onto the roof and was now dismantling the final camera that watched the front entrance. Jim's eyes went to the porch. Empty. Then back to the monitor. The figure was less than 15 feet from the front door. He could have dropped onto the porch at any moment, but he wasn't doing that. He was disabling the camera first. Jim understood why. The person did not want to be seen entering. They wanted Jim to believe the house was still secure until the last possible second. Jim slowly reached for the radio. He did not transmit. He knew the signal might reveal his position if the intruder had a scanner, though that was unlikely. He considered calling the sheriff again. 1 bar. He opened the phone and typed a message to the dispatcher he knew personally. Need units at my farm. Possible intruder. Phone 1 reliable. He pressed send. The message remained pending. He tried again. Pending. He placed the phone on the desk. Then he did something he had not done since his final year on patrol. He turned off the monitors. Every screen went black. The room became completely dark. He waited. Rain. Thunder. Wind. Nothing. Wind. Nothing else. He moved to the kitchen without using the flashlight. He knew the house by memory. Every floorboard, every cabinet, every doorway. He opened the drawer beneath the sink and removed a small roll of black electrical tape, a compact bolt cutter, and a pair of gloves. He put the gloves on. Then he went to the garage interior door and checked the lock. Secure. The intruder was on the roof. That meant the person had climbed from somewhere. Jim knew the likely routes. The porch roof could be reached from the attached garage roof, from the second-story dormer, or from a ladder placed against the front side of the house. The ladder was normally stored in the barn. He had not left one outside, unless someone had moved it. He looked through the garage window toward the barn. Darkness. He could not see the ladder. He returned to the den and turned one monitor back on. Camera 1 showed the porch. The intruder was gone. Jim froze. He rewound the feed. At 12,341, the figure remained above the porch. At 12,347, the hand moved. At 12,345, the image distorted. At 12,341, the image distorted. At 12,350, camera 1 went black. The person had disappeared. Jim switched to camera 3. Barn. Camera 4. South Road. Camera 5. Machine shed. All 3 remained active. He watched the barn feed. Nothing. He watched the South Road. Nothing. He watched the machine shed. Nothing. The intruder had vanished from the cameras. Jim did not assume he had left. He assumed he had entered the house. That was the difference between experience and hope. He moved toward the hallway. The front door was still locked. He checked the deadbolt. Locked. He checked the chain. Set. He crouched and examined the bottom gap. No light, no movement. He backed away. Then he heard a sound. 3 soft taps, not from the door, from above him. Jim looked at the ceiling. Another tap. A pause. Then one more. Someone was walking across the attic floor. He raised the pistol. His breathing slowed automatically. The attic access was in the hallway ceiling, directly above the coat closet. Jim knew there was no reason for anyone to be in the attic. He also knew the intruder had already been on the roof. There was a possibility they had entered through a vent or roof access. He did not go upstairs. He did not call out. Instead, he moved into the kitchen and shut off the refrigerator breaker, then the lights, then the stove. He killed every unnecessary electrical circuit in the house until only the camera backup system remained. The farmhouse disappeared into darkness. He took the flashlight from his pocket but did not switch it on. His eyes adjusted. The storm outside gave him occasional flashes of natural light. Another sound came from above. A faint scrape. Something being dragged. Jim looked toward the attic access. The panel remained closed. Then his cell phone vibrated on the desk. He nearly flinched. The message had finally sent. A reply appeared. Dispatch receive. Close quote raid. Impassable. Can send deputy when ACCs clears. Jim read it twice. The nearest deputy was at least 20 minutes away in good conditions. In this storm, maybe an hour. He typed back, do not approach house without contact. Possible armed suspect. Before he could send, the phone screen went dark. No battery warning. No gradual dimming. Dead. Jim stared at it. The charger was plugged in. The outlet had power from the backup circuit. He checked the cable. It had been cut cleanly. Not recently. The cut end rested behind the desk. Jim felt something inside his chest tighten. The intruder had already been in the room. He looked around. Nothing had moved, except the cable. He took one step backward, then another. The attic floor creaked. Jim turned toward the hallway. The sound came again. This time it was directly above the den. A slow footstep, then another. Whoever was up there knew exactly where he was. Jim moved to the pantry door and opened it. Behind the shelves was a narrow service passage leading to the basement stairs. He had never told anyone about it. It was part of the farmhouse's original construction. He entered and pulled the door nearly closed. He waited in darkness. 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, nothing. Then the attic access panel opened. Jim could hear the hinges, a soft metallic click, then silence. He imagined the person lowering themselves through the opening. He imagined boots touching the floor. He imagined the intruder standing in the dark room, looking at the empty chair where Jim had been sitting. But Jim did not imagine for long. His training kept him from filling in blanks. He listened for weight distribution, breathing, clothing movement, floor pressure. Nothing. That was what frightened him most. The person was disciplined enough to move without making unnecessary noise. Jim waited another minute before moving through the service passage. He reached the basement and entered the utility room. From there, he could access the old coal chute that opened outside near the north foundation. He had never used it except for storage, but it gave him a way out without crossing the main house. He opened the inner hatch and stopped. The outer hatch was already open. Rainwater was pouring inside. Someone had opened it from the outside. Jim crouched beside it. There were muddy boot marks on the concrete floor. One set. Fresh. The tracks led from the hatch toward the stairs, then stopped. Jim followed them with his eyes. They ended at the utility room doorway. Someone had entered the basement. Jim slowly raised his pistol. The house above him was silent. The camera system continued running on backup power. 3 feeds remained. Barn, South Road, machine shed. Then camera 4 went black. Jim looked at the monitor. The South Road had disappeared. He checked the time. 12:19. The intruder had now eliminated every camera except the 3 closest to the house. Jim knew what that meant. The person was not leaving. They were closing the perimeter. He checked camera 5. The machine shed remained visible. Camera 3. Barn. Then he noticed something in the barn feed. The image showed the empty aisle between the stalls. At first there was nothing. Then, far in the background, a door moved slightly. Jim leaned closer. The barn door was opening from inside. He watched. A dark figure appeared for less than a second, then disappeared behind a support beam. Jim realized the intruder was no longer on the roof. They had left the house. Somehow. He checked camera 5. The machine shed was empty. Camera 3 showed the barn. He enlarged the barn feed and watched the support beam. Nothing. Then he noticed a second detail. The grain auger door was open. He had locked it that afternoon. The person had entered the barn and was moving toward the grain bins. Jim's mind assembled the pieces. The cameras were being disabled from elevated positions. The intruder had used the roof to reach the front camera. They had entered the house through the attic or another opening. They had cut the phone charger. They had opened the basement hatch. Then they had gone back outside. Why? Jim looked at the grain bins. He understood. The highest point on the property was the old central grain silo. From there, someone could see the house, barn, equipment shed, and almost every remaining camera. The intruder was not simply trying to get inside. They were controlling the battlefield. Jim checked the weather radar on the monitor. The storm cell was directly over Shelby County. No vehicles would reach him quickly. He grabbed his flashlight, spare magazine, radio, and a heavy coat. He did not leave through the front door. He went down the basement stairs and out through the coal chute, stepping into freezing rain that immediately soaked his shoulders. The yard was black. He kept low and moved along the foundation toward the barn. He knew the ground. He knew where the mud was deepest. He knew which boards in the old fence were loose. He knew the drainage ditch. He knew the blind spots. If the intruder knew the property, Jim knew it better. Lightning flashed. For half a second, the grain silo rose above the farm like a black tower. At its highest platform, something moved. Jim stopped. The figure was standing beside the railing, looking directly toward the farmhouse. He could not see the face. He could not see a weapon, but he knew the posture. Patient, waiting, watching. Then lightning flashed again. The figure was gone. Jim lowered himself behind the barn wall. His radio crackled. He had not transmitted. A voice came through, barely audible beneath static. "Sheriff Vance?" Jim froze. It was not dispatch. It was a man's voice. Calm. Close. "You always did check the cameras first." Jim stared into the darkness. The voice came again, this time from somewhere beyond the barn. "That was your mistake." Jim did not answer. He shifted his pistol toward the sound. The rain struck the metal roof so hard he could barely hear anything. Then he noticed something else. On the barn wall, directly beside his shoulder, was a fresh handprint in the mud. Not old, not accidental. Someone had placed a hand there only seconds earlier. Jim looked toward the silo. The platform was empty. He looked toward the farmhouse. Empty. He looked toward the equipment shed. Empty. Then the radio in his hand whispered one final sentence. "You know the way out, Jim. I know the way in." Text Jim did not move, because the voice on the radio had not come from the radio. It had come through it. That distinction mattered. The radio had no open channel indicator, no transmission light, and the volume knob was turned almost completely down, yet the man's words had arrived with a clarity that made the hairs along Jim's forearms rise beneath his wet sleeves. He crouched lower against the barn wall and forced himself to breathe through his nose. The rain was so violent now that the world beyond 10 feet had ceased to exist, reduced to blackness and sheets of silver whenever lightning tore open the sky. He kept the pistol pointed toward the direction of the voice, but did not fire. A shot in that darkness would accomplish almost nothing. It would announce his exact position, destroy his night vision with muzzle flash, and tell the other man that Jim was frightened enough to react impulsively. Jim had spent too many years dealing with armed people to give anyone that advantage. He switched the radio off. The speaker continued hissing for half a second after the switch clicked, then fell silent. He waited. Nothing. He looked at the barn door. It was 20 yards away, maybe less. The rainwater running from the roof had turned the ground beneath him into a slick mixture of clay and manure. He could smell wet corn, diesel fuel, rust, and the faint sour odor of standing water. Above all of it was the clean, metallic smell of lightning. He checked his watch. 12:26. His mind began sorting facts. The intruder knew his name. The intruder knew he was a former sheriff's deputy. The intruder knew about the cameras. The intruder had probably studied the property beforehand. The intruder had entered the farmhouse without triggering any visible alarm. He had disabled the phone. He had manipulated the cameras. He had somehow accessed the radio frequency. That last point could mean several things: a scanner, a second radio, knowledge of the county frequencies, or simply luck. Jim refused to give the man abilities he had not demonstrated. He also refused to assume the man's objective was murder. People who wanted someone dead generally did not spend 40 minutes disabling cameras in sequence while leaving the target alive and aware. There was another objective, something on the property, something inside the house, something Jim possessed. He ran through possibilities. Cash? No. He rarely kept more than a few $100s at home. Drugs? Absolutely not. Evidence? His old service weapon and badge were in a locked safe, along with case files he had kept because he could not bring himself to throw them away. But those files were worthless to anyone who did not know what they contained. Land records? His farm was worth money, but nobody needed to stalk him in a thunderstorm to steal a deed. Then he remembered something that made his stomach tighten. 3 months earlier, while clearing brush along the north fence line, he had found an old steel ammunition box buried beneath a fallen cottonwood. He'd opened it, expecting rusted tools. Inside had been photographs, handwritten notes, and a small cassette tape sealed in plastic. The items belonged to a deputy named Dale Mercer, who had worked with Jim during the late 90s and died in a farming accident in 2003. Jim had forgotten about the box until now. He had never listened to the tape. He had placed everything in the gun safe. He had assumed it was personal material. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. A shape moved beyond the rain. Jim raised the pistol. The shape stopped. He waited. It was a fence post. Lightning illuminated it. He almost smiled at himself, but the feeling died immediately. The intruder wanted him thinking about what the intruder wanted. That could itself be a tactic. He needed to regain initiative. Jim slowly reached into his coat and removed his phone. Dead. He had a second emergency handset in the truck, but the truck was parked inside the detached garage. The garage could be reached from the barn by an old gravel path. If he could get there, he might have another means of communication. But first, he needed to know where the intruder was. He looked toward the silo again. The grain silo stood about 70 feet beyond the barn, a cylindrical steel structure nearly 80 feet tall with a narrow ladder running to the roof platform. The platform had a railing and an old maintenance cage. During dry weather, it was visible from almost anywhere on the property. Tonight, it was barely a darker shape against the clouds. If the intruder had been standing there, he had a perfect view of the farmhouse. Jim considered climbing it. He dismissed the idea immediately. A man who had deliberately chosen the highest point during a freezing thunderstorm was either suicidal or had a reason. Jim suspected the latter. The silo could be a trap. It could also be the only place from which the intruder could observe the remaining cameras without appearing on them. Jim needed to force him to move. He turned toward the barn. Instead of entering through the main door, he walked along the exterior wall toward the north side, keeping his body beneath the roofline. The rain hit him sideways. His boot slipped once and he caught himself against the siding. He froze. No response. He continued. The north door was locked from the inside, but Jim carried a key. He opened it silently and entered the barn. The sudden reduction in rain noise made the silence feel unnatural. Water dripped from his coat. The barn smelled of hay, oil, and wet wood. He stood motionless until his eyes adjusted. The only illumination came from a weak emergency light near the electrical panel. It cast a dull red glow across the concrete floor. Jim knew every object in the barn. Feed bins, old tractor parts, tool cabinets, hydraulic hoses, the ladder to the loft, the auger controls, the side door leading toward the grain bins. He moved toward the control panel and stopped. The auger switch was on. He had not turned it on. The motor hummed faintly. He looked through the open door toward the grain silo. Nothing. He reached for the emergency shutoff. Before his fingers touched it, the barn lights went out. Jim stopped breathing. Complete darkness. Then something struck the metal siding outside. Once, twice, 3 times. Not random. A deliberate pattern. Jim lowered himself behind the tractor. He listened. A footstep. Then another. Outside, someone was approaching the barn. Jim waited until the footsteps stopped. He heard a soft, metallic scrape. The side door handle moved, slowly. Jim's pistol rose. The handle stopped. The door did not open. Whoever was outside knew Jim was inside. The man was testing him. Jim looked toward the loft ladder. If he stayed on the floor, he could be cornered. If he climbed, he would expose himself. He decided to move. He crawled behind the tractor, crossed beneath the shadow of the loft, and reached the old grain chute. There was a maintenance hatch behind it, leading into a narrow storage compartment. He opened it and slipped inside. The compartment was barely wide enough for his shoulders. He pulled the hatch almost shut. Through the crack, he could see the barn floor. Nothing. 10 seconds passed. 20. 30. Then the side door opened. A man entered. Jim saw only boots at first. Black tactical boots, wet and mud-streaked. The man closed the door without a sound. He stood there listening. Jim watched the boots turn toward the tractor. The man was not carrying a flashlight. That meant he had night vision or knew the barn as well as Jim did. He took 3 steps. Stopped. Then another 3. Jim's hand tightened around the pistol. The boots moved toward the grain chute. Jim realized the man knew exactly where the hiding compartment was. The boots stopped 6 feet away. A gloved hand appeared in the narrow crack of the hatch. Jim held his breath. The fingers touched the edge, then withdrew. The man stepped away. Jim waited. The boots moved toward the loft ladder. The man climbed. Slowly, the metal ladder creaked beneath his weight. Jim counted each step. 8, 9, 10. Then silence. He waited another 20 seconds before opening the hatch. The barn was empty. Jim emerged and looked up. The loft was dark. He could hear rain striking the roof. He moved toward the electrical panel and turned on only the emergency circuit. The red light returned. The ladder was empty. Jim looked at the loft floor. Wet footprints crossed the boards. They led toward the far wall. There was a second access hatch there. Jim had forgotten about it. It opened onto the roof. He understood immediately. The man had not entered the loft to search for him. He had entered to get above him again. Jim crossed the barn and opened the side door to the grain bins. The rain hit him full in the face. He ran, not toward the house, toward the garage. He kept low and moved between the barn and a line of old equipment. Lightning flashed. The silo appeared. Nothing on the platform. He reached the garage. The main door was closed. He unlocked the side entrance and slipped inside. His truck sat beneath the roof, covered in dust and rainwater. He opened the driver's door and found the emergency handset in the glove compartment. The battery indicator showed 80%. He turned it on. No signal. He stepped out and raised it toward the garage door. 1 bar appeared. He called the sheriff's office. The call connected. A dispatcher answered immediately. Shelby County 911. Jim gave his name, address, and situation. He kept his voice low. Possible armed intruder on my property. Male. Has disabled external cameras and communications. I'm inside the north garage. The dispatcher asked whether he was injured. No. Is the suspect inside the residence? Jim looked toward the farmhouse. Unknown. Do you have a weapon? Yes. Stay inside a secure location. Deputies are being dispatched. Jim almost laughed. Secure location. He looked around the garage. How long? The dispatcher hesitated. Road conditions are extremely poor. Deputy Keller is coming from the west. Jim knew Keller. Good officer. Careful. Young enough to believe roads could still be negotiated in weather like this. Tell him not to use the south access road, Jim said. It's flooded near the creek. The dispatcher repeated it. Jim heard another voice in the background. Then the dispatcher returned. Mr. Brock, Vance, do you know where the suspect is? Jim looked through the rain-streaked garage window. No. Any description? Dark clothing. Approximately 6 feet. Male. Experienced. How do you know experienced? Jim watched the farmhouse. Because I'm still alive. The dispatcher went quiet for a second. Then she said, stay on the line. Jim did. He heard static. Then a faint popping sound. His eyes narrowed. That was not radio interference. It was an electrical arc. He looked toward the farmhouse. The entire house went black. The camera feeds in the garage monitor died. Jim's emergency handset crackled. "Mr. Vance?" The dispatcher sounded farther away. "Mr. Vance, are you there?" Jim turned toward the garage breaker panel. The intruder had found the main transformer or external junction. The entire farm had just lost power. Jim moved toward the side door. Then he stopped. There was a shadow beneath the garage door. Someone was standing outside. Jim could see boots through the narrow gap. He raised his pistol. The boots did not move. The dispatcher was still speaking. "Mr. Vance?" Jim whispered. "He's here." The boots shifted. Jim moved backward into the darkness. The man outside tapped the garage door twice. Jim stared at it. Then a voice came through the metal. "You should have stayed in the house." Jim recognized the voice, calm, almost conversational. "Who are you?" Jim asked. A pause. "You know me." Jim did not answer. "No," the man said. "You don't remember me." That answer was worse than a threat. Jim moved sideways toward the truck. "Why are you here?" The man laughed softly. "Because you kept something that wasn't yours." Jim thought of the steel ammunition box. His grip tightened. "What?" "The truth." Jim felt cold despite his coat. "What truth?" "The one Mercer died for." The name hit him like a physical blow. Dale Mercer. Jim looked at the garage door. The boots were gone. He stepped toward it, but stopped himself. No. The man wanted him to open it. He looked toward the emergency handset. The dispatcher had gone silent. The call had dropped. Jim checked the screen. No signal. He was alone again. He moved toward the truck and opened the driver's door. He could use the truck's radio if the battery was charged. He climbed in and turned the ignition. The engine started. The dashboard illuminated the garage. For a fraction of a second, Jim saw a figure standing behind the truck. He spun around. Empty. He slammed the door, shifted into reverse, and hit the accelerator. The truck crashed through the garage door. Metal screamed. Rain exploded across the windshield. Jim drove directly toward the farmhouse, headlights cutting through the storm. He did not stop. The truck slid sideways in the mud. Corrected and regained traction, he reached the house and parked beneath the front porch. He grabbed his weapon and ran inside. The front door was still locked. He opened it, entered, and locked it behind him. He stood in the darkness, listening. Nothing. He moved to the gun safe. His hands were steady. He opened it and removed the steel ammunition box. He placed it on the kitchen table. The box was old, scratched, and heavy. He had not opened it since the day he found it. He looked at the lock. Then he heard something upstairs. A floorboard creaked. Jim looked toward the ceiling. He knew exactly what the intruder wanted now. Not his money, not his land, not his life, at least not yet. The man wanted the contents of the box. Jim opened it. Inside were the photographs, the notes, and the cassette tape. He lifted the first photograph. It showed a farmhouse he recognized. Not his farmhouse, another property, 15 miles north. 3 men stood beside a grain truck. One was Dale Mercer. Another was a farmer named Howard Pike, whose name Jim remembered from an old missing person case. The third man was younger. Jim stared at the face. He knew him, not personally, but he had seen the photograph before. He had seen the same man in an investigation file 28 years earlier. The third man was Sheriff Raymond Voss, Jim's former supervisor. Voss had died in 2012. Jim turned over the photograph. On the back was a handwritten date, October 14, 1998. Underneath it were 4 words: "They buried him alive." Jim's stomach dropped. The floorboard upstairs creaked again, this time closer. Jim placed the photograph down and picked up the cassette tape. He had no cassette player. Then he remembered the old recorder in the attic. The intruder had been there. Jim suddenly understood why. The man had been searching for the tape player. He had not been hunting Jim. He had been hunting the evidence. Jim took the box and moved toward the basement. He stopped halfway. A soft sound came from the front porch. 3 knocks. Jim looked toward the door. The knocks came again. Then the man's voice. "You finally remembered." Jim did not answer. "Open the door, Jim." "Silence. I don't want to hurt you." Jim almost smiled. That was the oldest lie in the world. He moved into the pantry and opened the hidden passage. He carried the box with him. Behind him, the front door lock clicked. Jim froze. The deadbolt was moving. Someone had a key. The door opened slowly. Jim slipped into the passage and pulled the panel shut. He crouched in darkness while footsteps entered the kitchen. The intruder moved slowly. He did not search randomly. He went directly to the table. Jim heard the steel box lid scrape, then silence. The man realized it was gone. Jim moved deeper into the passage. He reached the basement. The old coal chute was open. He could escape again, but the storm was getting worse. Instead, he went toward the workshop. He had built a second hidden exit behind a shelving unit years ago. It led to the old root cellar beneath the corn crib. Few people knew it existed. He removed the shelf and crawled through. Behind him, the basement door opened. The intruder had followed. Jim heard him stop. Then the man spoke. "That's clever." Jim kept moving. "But you built it for yourself." Jim froze. The man's footsteps approached. "Which means you built it before you knew what I was looking for." Jim crawled faster. He reached the root cellar and pulled the wooden door shut. Above him, thunder shook the earth. He emerged beneath the corn crib and ran toward the grain bins. The silo was ahead, the only place on the farm where he could gain elevation and see the whole property. But as he reached the ladder, he noticed something hanging from the lowest rung. A photograph. He took it down. The image showed him standing beside Dale Mercer in 1998. Jim had forgotten the photograph existed. On the back, someone had written, "You were there." Jim stared at the words. He remembered. Not everything, but enough. 28 years earlier, there had been a farm dispute. A man named Howard Pike had disappeared. The official report said he had left voluntarily. Jim had been a young deputy then. Mercer had been his partner. Sheriff Voss had ordered them to close the case. Jim had obeyed. Mercer had not. A week later, Mercer stopped talking about the case. 2 years later, he transferred out of patrol. 5 years after that, he died in what was ruled an accident. Jim had never questioned it, until now. The grain silo ladder shook above him. Jim looked up. The intruder was climbing down. Jim stepped backward. The man appeared between the rungs, face hidden behind a black rain hood. He stopped 20 feet above the ground. "You should have listened to Mercer," he said. Jim raised his pistol. "Come down." The man smiled. Jim could barely see it. "You still think this is about you?" "It is." "No." The man descended another rung. "It's about what you did when you were 29. Jim's finger rested outside the trigger guard. "I didn't kill anybody." The man stopped. "I didn't say you did." Lightning flashed. For one instant, Jim saw the man's face clearly. He was older than Jim expected, mid-40s perhaps. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw. Jim stared at him. Something about the face struck a buried memory. A little boy, standing outside a farmhouse, watching deputies arrive. "A boy with blood on his shirt," Jim whispered. "Pike." The man looked down at him. "My name is Daniel Pike." Jim's chest tightened. "Howard's son." Daniel nodded. "You remember now." Jim lowered the pistol slightly. "Your father disappeared." "No." Daniel's voice remained calm. "My father was taken." "By who?" Daniel looked toward the farmhouse. "By 3 men." Jim already knew the answer. "Voss," Daniel said. "Mercer." Then he looked directly at Jim. "And you?" Jim shook his head. "I never touched him." "You held the flashlight." Jim's memory cracked open. A ditch, rain, a shovel, Mercer shouting, Voss telling him to stand back, Howard Pike kneeling in mud, Jim holding a flashlight because he was ordered to. a hole being dug beside an abandoned grain pit. Howard was alive. Jim had seen him breathing. He had told himself they were taking him somewhere. He had told himself it was an arrest. Then Mercer had looked at him. Just once. A look that said, "This is wrong." Jim had looked away. Daniel watched the realization spread across his face. "He was alive when you walked away," Daniel said. Jim swallowed. "What happened to him?" Daniel's expression changed for the first time. Hatred surfaced. "That's what the tape tells you. He climbed down another rung." Jim raised the pistol again. "Stop." Daniel stopped. "Give me the box." "No." "Then you'll never hear the rest." Jim looked toward the farmhouse. "You killed anyone else?" Daniel shook his head. "I came for the evidence. You cut my power because you would have called for help. You entered my house because you wouldn't give it to me. You threatened me because you were still protecting them." Jim looked at the box in his left hand. "Voss is dead. So is Mercer. Then who are you protecting?" Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Nobody." He climbed down until he was 10 feet above the ground. "I'm making sure the truth doesn't die with them." A loud metallic boom came from the grain bins. Jim turned his head. Daniel moved instantly. He dropped from the ladder. Jim stepped back, pistol raised. Daniel hit the mud hard, rolled, and came up with something in his hand. Jim fired one shot into the ground beside him. The report was enormous. Daniel flinched. Jim shouted, "Don't make me shoot you." Daniel looked at the pistol, then at Jim. "You already had your chance to be brave." He threw something into the mud between them, a cassette player. Jim stared at it. Daniel backed away. "Play it." Then he disappeared into the darkness. Jim did not chase him. He picked up the recorder and ran toward the farmhouse. Inside the kitchen, he locked every door. He found batteries in the utility drawer and inserted them. The tape was labeled in faded handwriting, HP OCT 14. He pressed play. Static filled the room. Then Dale Mercer's voice emerged, young and frightened. "If anyone hears this, Howard Pike is alive." Jim closed his eyes. The recording continued. Mercer described the night in detail. Voss had arranged the confrontation. Howard had discovered illegal dumping on farm property. Voss and 2 landowners had been involved. When Howard threatened to report them, they abducted him. Jim had been ordered to assist. Mercer had secretly recorded everything. Then came a sound Jim had never forgotten. Howard screaming from inside the grain pit. Mercer saying, "He's still alive." Voss answering, "Then keep throwing dirt." Jim opened his eyes. The tape continued. "Jim doesn't know," Mercer said. "I don't think he understands what they're doing. He thinks Howard is being transferred." A pause. Then Mercer whispered, "God forgive me." The recording ended. Jim stood in the kitchen, shaking. Outside, the storm screamed across the farm. Then the cassette player clicked. The tape had not ended. A second recording began. Mercer spoke again, but his voice was older, tired. "If you're hearing this, Daniel found the box." Jim's blood ran cold. "Daniel is Howard's son. I kept him away from this because Voss threatened to kill him too." A long silence followed. Jim Vance was not innocent, but he was not the man who ordered it. I watched him carry that guilt for years without understanding what he had done. Jim stared at the tape. Mercer continued, "The person who ordered Howard's burial was not Voss." Jim stopped breathing. It was someone above him. The tape crackled. Someone who still has friends in law enforcement. Then the recording ended. Jim stood motionless. A vehicle engine started outside. He ran to the window. Headlights appeared through the rain on the county road. One vehicle, then another. Jim grabbed his radio and turned it on. Static. A voice came through. "Sheriff Vance, this is Deputy Keller. We're approaching your property." Jim looked at the vehicles. Something was wrong. Keller knew the road was impassable. Jim had warned dispatch. Yet the headlights were coming from the north, where no county vehicle should have been able to travel. He grabbed the flashlight and moved toward the front door. The headlights stopped. 2 doors opened. 3 men stepped out. Jim could not see their faces. Then one of them raised a hand toward the farmhouse. The porch light came on. Jim realized the power had returned. The cameras began rebooting. One by one, their screens appeared on the monitor. Camera 1, porch. Camera 2, rear yard. Camera 3, barn. Camera 4, south road. Camera 5, machine shed. Camera 6, west pasture. Camera 7, equipment shed. Camera 8, grain bins. Every camera was alive. Jim stared at the screens. The system had been restored remotely. Then Camera 8 displayed the grain silo. Daniel Pike stood at the base of the ladder watching the approaching vehicles. He looked directly into the camera. Then he pointed toward the farmhouse. Jim switched to Camera 1. 3 men were walking toward his porch. One carried a shotgun. Another carried a rifle. The third held a flashlight. Jim's radio crackled. A voice said, "Jim, open the door." He recognized it. Not Keller, not dispatch. Someone from his past. Someone he had not heard in 28 years. Sheriff Raymond Voss was dead. Jim knew that. He had attended the funeral. He had seen the body. Yet the voice on the radio was unmistakable. "You should have burned the box when you found it." Jim looked at the kitchen table. The cassette player was still running. Outside, the 3 men reached the porch. One lifted his hand. The other 2 spread out. Jim moved toward the basement. Then a 4th figure appeared on Camera 8. Daniel Pike was climbing the silo ladder. He reached the platform and turned toward the farmhouse. The radio whispered again. "This time, Jim, nobody walks away." Jim looked at the ammunition box. He looked at the basement door. Then he looked at the 3 men outside. For the first time that night, he understood the entire shape of the trap. Daniel had not come to kill him. Daniel had come to force him to remember. The men at the door had come to make sure he never told anyone what he remembered. And somewhere between the two, hidden in the storm, was the truth about what had happened to Howard Pike 28 years ago. Jim opened the basement door. He took the box. He took the pistol. Then he took the old sheriff's badge from the safe, pinned it to his coat, and walked toward the front door. He was done hiding.